my point, to try and make it simple, is about the Arab nationalism, which pan-Arabism, which reminds me that we often look at issues in binaries. We sort of see Sykes-Picot is bad, therefore whatever is against Sykes-Picot must be good. But of course, the image I have in mind is the border between Iraq and Syria was knocked down by ISIS. So, you know, they did the right thing, but for the wrong motivation. My main point about pan-Arabism is I was wondering why has it not succeeded? I think answers sort of come out to some extent.
And I can add other factors, but if there is time.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear. I mean, the one point I was going to make was, of course, 400 years ago, the whole Middle East was one block. Everybody was an Ottoman subject. Some were Muslim, some were Christian, some were Maronite. You know, some spoke Arabic. We spoke about passed on memories. Of course, people who are Arabic were writing Arabic for 400 years. It didn't affect their identity. In fact, it enhanced it. And yet, politically, it was off the table. Yeah, the point I was going to make is when the Ottoman yoke, as it were, was lifted, and then later the European yoke, and then in the question of Israel and Palestine, there's that whole issue as well. But for the most part, the Middle East had the Ottoman yoke taken off it. Then everybody wanted to be, there was a move for pan-Arabism. But the problem, I would hazard, is each and every center would say, well, actually, we're the quintessential, Syrians would say, we're the quintessential Arabs. This should be Greater Syria, Bilad al-Sham. People in Saudi Arabia would say, no, we've got the two holy places. We should be the leader. In Libya, as you well know, Libyan people, they felt we're the leaders. So it's a little bit like the European Union, which maybe the Germans and the French agreed to disagree and say, actually, we're the leader, and Britain certainly isn't. But that's basically the nature of the problem. It's to make a large collaborative venture, but in whose image is it? Is it really possible to have an aggregate of everybody's desires? Probably not so. Thank you.
That links in nicely to Jonathan's point, which I'd be very fascinated to hear about the distinction between the European national identity and the Islamic, or Arab rather, regional identity, and perhaps the pan-Arab identity. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll try and put it in just a couple of minutes. There's been several references to the nation state and to the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, which is generally recognized as the moment when the European powers recognized that they had rights over their own people within their own borders and nobody should interfere. I think what's often missed is actually this was also, if not mainly, about personal power. It was kings and princes basically drawing lines and saying, everything inside that line is mine, keep out. And interestingly, that concept of the nation state then became a template as the process of decolonization went on. In large parts of the world, particularly in much of Africa, the borders that were left by the colonial powers are completely illogical, often running across ethnic divisions. But the leaders of those new states quickly decided they shouldn't question the borders because that would lead to war. And moreover, they rather liked the idea that they could be the equivalent of a king or princeling and create a form of national identity, which basically was this is mine, stay out. And then they had as much personal control as possible. And I would argue, others might disagree, that pan-Arabism, as promoted by Nasser and others, basically failed because it came into conflict with that basic wish, not just of Syria, but of other Arab countries that were saying, well, it's all right being pan-Arab and we'll give some nods toward that. But basically, we like the idea of our nation state because we can control it. in some cases we can control its oil and other resources, and that therefore the nation state has continued and probably will continue for quite a long time, despite the fact that there are quite justifiably attempts by several regional groups and ethnicities to break away. And of course, the one interesting case in Africa that succeeded was Eritrea, which broke away from Ethiopia, which perhaps could be a sign of what may happen in other areas.
So are you saying that the reason that pan-Arabism failed is because pan-Arabism ultimately tried to use a European template and build on that in order to bolster? So Arabs like Abdel Nasser tried to emancipate themselves and empower themselves, but they tried to do that through a European paradigm. Is that kind of the gist of
No,
the
not
argument?
exactly. No, what I'm saying is that pan-Arabism was challenging the concept of the nation state as the most important aspect of identity, but it was like a train crash into the reality of the nation state and the fact that too many leaders, whether it was the Syrians or others, were determined to hang on to their own national identity.
Okay, that's interesting. So I have one other question about this. Does this mean that do you believe that realism as a political science dynamic is applicable to the Arab world as well as the European world, because we've now adopted the nation state system?
Gosh, it's a big, a big question. I think, what's happening in the Arab world at the moment is very interesting, because although, yes, the nation state system was adopted, we're living through a period of dramatic change in the Arab world. I hate to use the expression the Arab Spring because it was a lazy journalistic description of what happened at particularly in 2011. I said at the time, this is going to go on for 20 or 30 years at least, and then we'll be able to see the changes that have come about, particularly as a new generation takes over, as much of the movement was led by young people, because the nation state is actually more held in high regard by those of an older generation in the Arab world who actually have the power. And so it'd be very interesting to see what now happens as these waves of social and political change take place. So I wouldn't try to stick the label of realism or anything else on what's going on. It's still happening, and we'll see what comes out at the end.
I don't know there's a label for what's going on terrible right now. We will discover in 20 years, like you said.
Annalisa Rice says it is friendly, friendly creative chaos? Creative friendly chaos. I forgot how it goes. Either creative friendly chaos?
Creative dissonance.
Something along those lines, about like what's going on in
Creative and friendly, really?
Because she said like we want to create a creative friendly chaos.
Yeah, we're controlled beaker.
About what Jonathan said, I could see you reacting quite heavily. So what's your...
My reaction was not to what Jonathan said. I agree with Jonathan. My response is to realism. Realism, I'm like, no, like that lens just doesn't work. Empirical evidence, empirically speaking, realism, balance of power, that just is, there's no empirical evidence to support it, especially when it comes to like from an international relations perspective between states. Just I am pro power transition theory, so, and I think there's a lot more empirical evidence that support it. So, and then I mean that's a whole other discussion that we think we should do for another day. But after realism, like no.